Welcome to the Taproom Exclusive. I'm Dean Zarbaugh. I'm with Leslie Basalla-McCafferty. Did I pronounce the middle name right?
That is 100% correct.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I want to make sure. And Brian McCafferty, how are you today? Thank you for joining me. We are here at Working Class Brewery. We are enjoying a couple beers while we talk. You guys do the Cleveland Brew Bus. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so this is a really cool idea. When I first started the show, your name was Leslie was one of the first names that popped up in a lot of research. I think you were speaking at did you do a thing at Grafton Library?
I did. I actually did 2 talks there back in March and April.
Okay, yeah, that's right about when I started the show and getting into and getting around to know a lot more people, and your name was one of the first people that popped up, and it sounded like a really cool class. So you go around, you have a lot of knowledge of the Northeast Ohio craft beer world and the history of it. What was it about beer that got you into it?
So do you want the full story, or do you want the Reader's Digest version?
Whichever version you feel comfortable giving.
Go full story.
So I guess if you need to know one thing about the kind of person I am, it's that if I am into something, I can't just like it and just enjoy it at face value. That's not how I'm wired. My dad's the same way. If I like something, I feel absolutely driven to become an expert on it.
Okay.
So I'm 41. Just turned 41 a couple months ago, or actually a couple weeks ago. And my father got into the kind of first wave of craft beer back in the late 80s, early 90s in a really big way. And so whenever, Christmas, birthday time came around, I would end up buying him books about beer.
Okay.
Which, because I'm intellectually curious, I would end up reading. And then my mom signed him up for a Beer of the Month Club when I was about 19 or 20, and he knew I had a little curiosity about this kind of stuff, so he would generously let me have one beer out of each of the 2 6-packs he got in the mail every month. And so I got to try a lot of really amazing beers that did not have anything resembling Cleveland distribution when I was very young. Mm-hmm. And that fascination just kind of stayed with me. It's something I've always been into. Throughout college, I would go up to the local, beverage store that did the mix of 6 on Monday, and I'd try 12 different beers every Monday with my boyfriend, and just continually helped to educate myself on it. And then through a series of service industry jobs later, worked my way into working in a brewery.
Oh, nice. What were some of those books? Do you remember any of those books? I just started buying a lot of books myself because that's been my thing. I like the craft beer Bible, all that kind of stuff. Do you remember anything that sticks out in your mind?
Well, it was 20 years ago, so not specific titles, but definitely some of Michael Jackson's books, things like that.
And so now you've been around the beer industry now a while. Talk about a little bit. I mean, we know it's grown exponentially from 88, let's say, right around when Great Lakes started. It's really boomed out. What's been one of the biggest shifts? Talk about the big industry boom. What really helped energize this industry, especially here in Northeast Ohio?
Well, I think a lot of it kind of comes down to changing patterns of consumption. If you kind of think about the way people have gone about not just what they drink, but what they eat, in the last 20 years or so, you've really seen a shift from America being sort of a, meat and potatoes, fast food, Applebee's kind of society, to people being more and more interested in trying all kinds of different gourmet and ethnic cuisines, focusing so much more on going to independent restaurants instead of chains and fast food places. And I feel like the patterns of beverage consumption have kind of gone the same way. There are plenty of people out there who are still perfectly happy to eat nothing but Applebee's and Taco Bell and drink Bud Light. But you've definitely seen a demographic shift of people being much more open-minded and willing to try new flavors in terms of what they eat, in terms of what they drink, and that's not just beer. That's wine, that's liquor, that's everything. So I think that's been a big part of the shift. And I think there's also, this is one of the things I talk about a lot of times on our tours, I think there's also been a consciousness of locality. People who are interested in supporting independent businesses don't want to just support small guys. They want to support the guys that are in their backyard. And so I think that's really helped to fuel the craft beer movement as well. People want to go and purchase beer from the guy who made it, and be able to shake hands with that person and share their feedback.
And that's a lot like me. A lot of people come in. I work in the beer industry as a day job, and so I deal with a lot of people coming in and asking for stuff. And I find myself having mostly been drinking local Ohio beers. And so a lot of people come in. There's so many things out there. There's so many options out there these days. I'd prefer if I know my money's going back into my community. That's a big thing for me. And so I really enjoy this scene. I tell people, my dad traveled to Florida recently, and everybody talks about Cigar City and High Life and how great the IPA. It's a great IPA, don't get me wrong. But I think we're so spoiled with an IPA market up here in Cleveland that something like that, it's good as it is, in this market, is just it just kind of, it goes under the radar. And it just speaks to the quality of this scene. I can't find stuff that I'm as excited about as the stuff here in Cleveland. You started here. You grew up here. What is it about Cleveland that seems to be this mecca of craft beer recently?
Well, I think it's reflective of what's going on in the entire country. Everywhere is blowing up. From little teeny tiny towns to big metropolises. I mean, if you look at just the numbers that the Brewers Association calculates, I think we're on par to hit 7,000 breweries in the United States this year, which is insane. That's considering nuts. That only 3 years ago it just finally surpassed the the historic mark of 4,100. So
wow,
it's just growing absolutely exponentially, and it's not just here. But I do think Cleveland is a beer-drinking town. We're a working-class town, broad-shouldered people of a lot of extraction, a lot of ethnic extraction from beer-drinking cultures. There's a lot of Germans and Poles and Czechs and Irish in this town.
Going with the quality of the beer that we have, I think the biggest thing is the lake area itself.
Yeah,
is a
great
big
point.
Important because the mineral content of lake area is just so important on making a good beer. You really can't find that kind of mineral content, but unless they add things to the water in somewhere like Florida.
Very nice. That's a very nice point. It is often called our greatest resource, and with great reason. There's so much that comes from our lake. And what inspired you guys to do the brew tour, on a bus, going around to do all these breweries? It's such a cool idea. It gets people, out to try a lot of new things, a lot of places they might not have tried before, and you also educate them along the way. So, what was the inspiration behind doing that?
Well, to be 100% honest, we were actually the second owners of the company. So a little of our backstory. I actually, most recently, prior to doing the Brew Bus, was front of house manager at Market Garden Brewery from 2012 to 14. And the original owners of the Brew Bus, a couple from Strongsville named Bob and Shelley Campbell, they started it around 2013, right about the middle of my tenure there. And I had kind of become the de facto sort of beer education tour guide person at Market Garden during that juncture. I was the only one of the front of house managers who really liked talking to large groups of people.
It's a very specific skill to have. Not a lot of people like doing it.
Exactly. So whenever brew bus groups would come through there in those early days, I was the one who would be taking those groups back into the little 10-barrel brew house there at the brew pub, and just kind of breaking the brewing process down into layman's terms, explaining malt, hops, mashing, lautering, all that stuff. And talking a little bit about the history of that company as well. Towards the end of my time there, I was kind of reaching a point where I'd been in the service industry for about 10 years. I was getting a little worn out of managing restaurants. So it's a lot of hours.
A lot out of you.
Yeah. And so I had decided just prior to the holidays, 2013, that I was going to leave there in the spring. And I just happened to approach Bob, the then owner of the Brew Bus, about, hey, do you guys expanding? Do you need some help? I'm thinking about getting out of here. I think I'd make a good tour guide. And first he was like, oh, no, we cannot take you. We have way too good a relationship with Market Garden. If they think we poached you, they're never going to let us come back.
That's a worry. I can see how they'd be concerned about that.
And then I was like, dude, I'm quitting one way or another. And, and he's like, well, in that case, yes, we totally need help. So the way it kind of panned out with those guys was that they had kind of started this as sort of a little hobby business, a little something they were doing on the side. I think the idea was they would eventually expand once they retired and make it into more of a full-time job.
Okay.
The problem was neither of them were retired yet.
Gotcha.
So she's teaching full-time, like third grade in North Olmsted Public Schools. I think it's third grade. I don't remember. He had actually retired, but then got brought back on with the corporation he was working for as a consultant, overseeing like a really major national project. So he was traveling all over the country Monday through Friday. He'd be getting back into town and just exhausted. And so she would end up being the one giving all the tours on the weekend, even though the brew bus was really his baby.
Oh, okay.
And so I think it was having maybe, in addition to just taking up a lot of their time, maybe even having a little bit of a negative impact on their marriage.
Yeah.
So we kind of stepped in at just the right moment. I volunteered my services as a tour guide. I threw Brian into the mix here. I was like, hey, my husband has a CDL. He could drive.
There you go.
So we kind of became a package deal. We started giving tours for them in like 2014.
She was nice enough to consult with me before that.
Yeah, he does have to watch all these people drink and not get to participate.
Yeah, that's a hard thing to do. I do that at my day job. That's what I do all day. So
It's a tough job.
It's really tough.
Yeah, but anyway, so yeah, early 2013, we started giving the tours. Within a couple of months, I saw that like the other people that they had helping them just like didn't know what they were doing. Like they had their son's girlfriend like answering the phones and doing like the itineraries, and she's from Canton. She didn't know her way around the city at all. So like tours would be bouncing like from one side of town to another and then back.
Yeah.
And I'd
just
be
not efficient.
Yeah, I'd be looking at this going, this is dumb. So finally, so a couple months later, I think like by May of 14, it was like, Bob, give me the phone, give me the laptop, just let me do the booking, let me be the one setting the reservations up with the breweries. I know all these people anyway. And so a couple months after that, they were just like, hey, do you want to take the company over? And it was kind of a no-brainer. We were pretty much running the whole show anyway.
Right.
And, for my part, I besides the fact that, this is actually sort of the same stuff that's in my opening spiel when we give the tours, by the way. For my part, not only do I love just talking about beer, educating people about these breweries, educating people about beer styles and history, I really like to think of myself and Brian as being ambassadors, not just for Cleveland beer, but for Cleveland as a whole. We love this city. We're very passionate about it as a place. We see so much potential here. And so many of our clientele are people from out of town, or they're people who live out in the suburbs, who come into the city like once a year. And to be able to show like all of this great stuff that is going on, it makes us feel like we're doing some good.
Absolutely. I went to college in Florida. I lived in Los Angeles for about 5 years. And the last year I was in LA, I started getting really homesick for Cleveland, and I don't know what it is about the city, but it really drew me back. And it was about a year ago that the craft beer scene really kind of took me over. I actually at Market Garden, I got to go on a tour and learn probably the spiel you were doing, and just that one tour really sparked this whole thing. It's a really fun industry that we're in. So like talk a little bit more about the Brew Bus and what it is, how do people get in touch with you, and how do people like book it? And cause am I right? If you have a party of 8 or more, you can kind of choose the breweries within reason.
So we have about like 7 different routes that we offer. You can see them all right online at clevelandbrewbus.com. And within a lot of our routes, we have a little bit of variability, but kind of backtracking. So basic gist of our tours is that all of our tours visit 3 different breweries per trip. You get a guided sampling of 4 beers at each location. Generally, those beers are selected, kind of curated by me and or people at the brewery kind of working together to show off what they do best, what makes them unique, maybe what they've won awards for, have had a lot of buzz about recently, and of course to mix it up as much as possible stylistically, so you're not getting 12 IPAs over the course of the tour. One of our big goals is always to get people sort of out of their little individual drinking boxes. So if you're that IPA guy, yeah, we're gonna make you drink some wheat beers and some pilsners and some stouts and so on. If you're that stout guy, you're gonna have a lager,
Yeah.
So that's kind of the basic setup of the tour. Always 3 breweries, always 4 samples per location. At each stop, as people are sampling these beers that we're selecting for them, either me or one of our other tour guides or somebody from the brewery is going to be kind of explaining those samples, giving tasting notes, style, history, story behind whatever silly name the brewery gave the beer, if we know it, or why they chose to brew that particular style. At least one location we try to get you behind the scenes to see the brewing equipment, learn a little bit about the process, get a better feel for how beer is made. And while it's not included in the ticket price, we do always include time at least one stop for people to eat too, since we are feeding you 60 ounces of craft beer over the tour, which is plenty for most people.
Yeah, that's almost a half gallon of beer.
One of the fun things is also talking about the building itself, or the brewer, where we came from, and the history behind the building. There's so many great buildings that we have in town that have stories behind them.
Great Lakes, I did Great Lakes on the show. I talked to Mark Hunger. I talked to Steve Foreman. I talked to Bridget Barrett, the executive vice president of marketing, and Michael. And it was really cool to hear that story. And that was actually the first day when I went to Market Garden. We also did Great Lakes, and they talked about Elliot Ness sitting at the bar, and the original the side of the building has the original name, like it was a bar, but it was for medicinal purposes or whatever. I think that is what really drew me to a lot of. I'm a huge history buff.
Absolutely, and there is so much history here. It's we're lucky that we live in a city that has like a long, deep, rich brewing history where it's not just something that's kind of popped up in the last 10 years. We had 30 breweries here prior to Prohibition.
Right. And, I brought home, Double Wing does POC now, and I brought home one of those, and my dad's 73, and he saw that, and he did a double take, wait a minute, POC? Wait, that's back? And, he was just the idea that they're bringing old recipes back even. It's really cool, just a lot of the fun stuff that this industry is doing. What's been some of your favorite trends that you've been seeing pop up lately? There's just been it seems like almost every couple months there's some sort of new trend coming along, whether it's New England IPAs, which are fantastic, or big bodied ABV beers, or it's something.
To me, trends are fun. People obviously want to hear about what's happening and new and exciting in the industry. Though I don't like to think of myself particularly as a trend chaser. I'm always happy when we're at a brewery, that does something like New England IPAs really well. If we're going to Masthead, obviously we're going to be serving some New England IPAs, or
absolutely,
like a pastry stout.
That's one of the places I like to recommend for that style.
Yeah, if we're going to, Bottle House or Hansa, they're going to get a kettle sour.
Yes.
So we definitely like to highlight those breweries that do those things well, but I honestly kind of like to, again, I'm trying to show off sort of the depth and breadth and scope of what craft beer can be. So I'm not always going to just go after the big trends. I'm going to make sure that oh, hey, this place has a Schwarzbier. That's a really underrated style. Everybody should try Schwarzbier.
Yes.
Things like that. In terms of, so I don't really, in terms of trends, I think what's more interesting, over whatever, the latest hot beer style is kind of more the approach that breweries are taking to their business.
Okay.
I really like the emergence that we've seen in the last year or so of sort of the casual neighborhood tap room. That's not, it's not the full service Great Lakes Fatheads model of brew pub restaurant where you sit down at a 4-top table and you have a server taking care of you. But where it's, a place like we're sitting here at Working Class Brewery, it's a small neighborhood joint. They're not trying to go toe-to-toe with Great Lakes or Fatheads for cooler space. They're trying to be a hub for their neighborhood. They're collaborating with other small businesses to provide food for their guests because they don't have a kitchen, so they're bringing in pop-up kitchens and food trucks and stuff like that. I think that's really where the future of the industry is right now. I think we've reached maybe a little bit of a tipping point for big distributing breweries. Like, there's just not that much room for that many more. When you look when you look at the limited, shelf space and cooler space
That's
available in retailers.
That's my day job, and every day it seems like I have to cut something new in or find a way to put this beer on the shelf.
Exactly. So I think there's a really great niche for small neighborhood breweries that aren't trying to be the next big guys. Places like Terrestrial, Noble Beast, Brick and Barrel, Hansa. Those are the places that to some degree we really like hanging out to because we can only get their beer there for the most part.
Right. And that's always, like you were saying earlier, going to the source for the product is always a good feeling. You were talking about the your tours and spreading the wealth as far as styles go. What's been kind of the feedback as far as someone, let's say, who's mainly an IPA drinker? What has been the feedback as far as getting to try these new styles and stepping out of their comfort zone? Have people been really receptive to this? It seems like, for me, I don't try to stick to one style. I like IPAs, but there's also a time where I'm just tired of them. So I like stepping out. This seems like a really good idea. Has that seemed to have been the trend going around?
It seems to be a bit of a stepping out of the box, but it's also it's the sample size, so it's like at least finish the damn beer. That's all we ask.
Yeah, it's only a 5-ounce sample.
Sometimes,
it's included in the price. You've already paid for it.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, okay, it's kind of different, but I wouldn't drink a lot of them.
Yeah, I'd say it depends on the person too. You've got your people who are game. They're willing to try anything. They're happy. There's going to be some things they don't like and they don't finish. Exactly, and I tell people that all the time. I always say nobody's palate is right or wrong. Everybody's is individual. You're going to get once in a great while, that super beer snob who's just not interested in trying anything other than what they like, and they're just not going to have a good time on our tours, period, and they're going to be the ones with their arms crossed looking at me like, what are you going to tell me? We've had that. But for the most part, people respond well, and here and there there's going to be something, like sours. A lot of our clientele are not what I would call hardcore beer nerds. They're beer dilettantes.
Gotcha.
They like a little bit of craft beer. They enjoy it, but they don't really know much about it. And so every now and then you'll put something like that in front of somebody that's just totally out of the realm of anything they've had before, and they just kind of can't wrap their mind around it. And I always say, don't give up on it on the first sip. Try a few more sips before you maybe your palate will acclimate to it. Maybe you'll get into it. But inevitably, there's going to be, something like a sour or a smoked beer or something barrel-aged or whatever it might be. The people are just, they just can't get there. And that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. If we all like the same kind of beer, there'd only be one kind of beer. That's what my dad likes to say about cigars. He also likes to say, if you like Ripple, it's a good wine. So, what you like is what you like. No one can tell you right or wrong. But for me, even if I don't like sours, I don't dislike sours. I have an appreciation for them. I think there's a specific space for them, and while I may not specifically like it, I have an appreciation of the style, and I think that's what this industry has helped give me, is an appreciation for styles that I might not personally drink. There's a few sours that I like. If I go for a sour, I'm going to probably like a Jackie O's or something like that. I really like Jackie O's sour program. There's a lot of great sour programs in Ohio. I think Urban Artifact's finally getting up here a little bit more. I'm going to finally start carrying them on my shelves finally.
Little Fish is awesome too.
I've heard very good things about Little Fish. I have not had anything from Little Fish yet, but that is one I really want to get to. Also down in Athens, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But I always tell people who come in, because we have a growler station at my store. You can come in and try samples of draft, and we always try to keep a few different styles on. There's always an IPA, but there's always a whole bunch of different stuff on the other sides. That's the main thing I try to tell people is, if you don't like it, don't don't poo-poo on the style. You don't like it. There's a difference between you not liking it and it being a quote-unquote bad beer.
Exactly, and that's another thing I try to kind of teach people. I always, if you're not like obviously a hardcore beer geek, you're not going to follow BJCP guidelines or whatever when you're kind of evaluating a beer. But I always try to explain the sort of analogy that I use with our guests is I always try to explain it like judging a dog show.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, so if you're the judge of like the American Kennel Club dog show, you're not picking the dog you think is cutest or
right.
Most appealing. You're picking the dog that best represents that particular breed. And I said every beer style has kind of a set of parameters, a guideline, and so you have to evaluate your beer, even if it's not to your palate, based on like, is this a good example of this style? Is it clean? Does it does it taste weird? Does it have off flavors? If it's an IPA, is it dry and hop forward and have some nice pine or citrus notes or whatever it might be? If it has like some weird residual sweetness, that might not be a very good example of the style, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad just because you don't like that particular style.
Right. I've really enjoyed talking to you about beer. What, outside of just like reading these books that maybe you got your dad and stuff, like where have you accumulated your knowledge? Because every time I talk to somebody, you're the name that pops up as far as knowledge of beer industry and knowledge of beer. Help me a little bit, because I'm really trying. I'm new to this journey. A billion times more than I do, and I'll happily admit that. And help me learn more. Like, what did you do to really be able to break down flavors and just learn about the history? Just reading, trying stuff. What was it?
If I may, before that, she's very correct, and she has to know everything about everything if she really enjoys something.
I know that feeling very well.
Yes, and the whole thing is, it's like she just needs. She cannot just let it go, and she needs to really
follow it through.
Yeah, follow through.
Yeah, I know exactly how that is.
And her poor parents had to put up with this, and I'm grudgingly putting up with this, but I love it though. Because
Well, it's a little. I guess it's a little column A, a little column B. Definitely a lot of it has been reading, just continually. Following beer blogs, and I've on my Facebook, one of the first things that you can kind of pick like what you see first. Like I have one of my first things that comes up is not only all the local breweries posts, but like Paste magazine. I think like Paste's craft beer coverage is excellent. So I'm always reading all of their little top rankings of different styles. So reading is definitely a big part of it. But I think really the most important things are tasting, just going around, hitting as many craft beer bars and breweries as you can wherever you are, whether you're local, whether you're traveling, trying lots of different things, getting together with those friends who are doing bottle shares and trying out some of that stuff. And for my part, luckily being so ensconced in the industry, I know all the brewers too, so I can pick their brains. I can sample something and go, what hops did you use in this? What yeast strain is this?
Right.
And kind of get intimate with their processes, and I think there's so much you can learn that way.
Mike Roeder, one of the owners of Catawba Island Brewing Company, he when I interviewed him, he told me, because that was a little earlier on in my show and still getting my palate going. Kept asking him these questions, and he just asked me, he goes, "What do you taste?" And he goes, "If you taste burnt pickle, tell me you taste burnt pickle." Like, you're not wrong, but just say it, because that's really how you learn like flavor profiles and stuff.
Whose tongue is the same?
Exactly. And I think coming from a background in the restaurant industry, that's helped me a lot too, because I know a lot about food and recipes and cooking, and so I'm able to kind of identify corollary culinary flavors. So that
would be big. Yeah.
Yeah.
My biggest thing right now is the aromas. I don't know how to do that. I can't break down aromas. I don't know what it is. I have a bad septum, I guess. I don't know what it is, but
it's interesting how aromas are different than the actual taste.
Right.
You pick up a beer and you smell this floral, citrusy kind of taste, but then you taste the beer and it's like, but then sometimes it's like, well, the beer should have sat a little longer before they canned it or before it was brought out here.
Right. Yeah, it's a very crazy.
In my nose, anyway.
Yeah.
Absolutely, no. I don't have a great nose.
Well, there is also, I believe, biological evidence. I'm just saying that female palates are much more sensitive and nuanced than male palates.
I would agree with that.
Yep.
I would 100% agree with that.
I'll have to find sourcing for that and get back to you. But I know I've read that someplace.
Please cite this episode.
Your sourcing is your nose.
That's true, you know.
Well, except for this time of year when I'm totally afflicted with allergies and can't smell anything.
Oh yeah, this time of year really and then especially now because it's been fluctuating between 60 and 85 day to day.
Yeah, I was joking that we're on third summer today.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's been crazy. You also started doing the Cleveland the Brew Bus, the history tours. We'll talk a little bit about that as well, and how does that differ from your regular tours?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really, really, really excited about our history tours. So, like I said, our standard tours, it's really focused on the beer tasting, on checking out the breweries, learning about the current occupants, their history, and kind of about the current Cleveland beer scene, and really exposing people to lots of different styles of beer. The history tours have a very different focus. I am the co-author of a book called Cleveland Beer, History and Revival in the Rust Belt, along with my friend Peter Shakarian, who, if you've taken the Great Lakes tour, you might have met him because he's actually one of the tour guides over there nowadays.
Oh, okay.
So I have a fairly strong background in local beer history, and Brian is quite a history buff himself. He knew quite a bit more early on than I did about like some of the history of like early beer gardens in Cleveland and things like that. So I've always wanted to find a way to kind of interpret the contents of the book a little bit into more of a tangible experience for our guests. So we're running the history tours Sunday afternoons. We're just going to do it for the next month or so because they do include some walking portions, and we all know what weather. Yeah, we all know what weather in Cleveland does mid-November.
We'll start back in mid-June, probably.
Yeah. So my plan right now is to kind of run this through the middle of November, and then maybe pick it back up starting around April next year.
Yeah.
But the way these tours work is a little different. We meet in Market Square Park, right across from the West Side Market. And if you're not aware, like Ohio City, of course, nowadays is kind of the heart of brewing in Cleveland.
Absolutely.
But it was also the hub of brewing in Cleveland prior to Prohibition. There were a lot of breweries within about a 1 mile radius of 25th and Lorraine back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So we kind of start there in Market Square, and I kind of point out where some of the adjacent breweries were, just kitty corner across where like the plaza is on the southeast corner of Lorraine and 25th. That's where the Gehring Brewery was.
Okay.
And then we walk through the Great Lakes campus, and we point out that sign that you were talking about. That was for the Lloyd and Keys Cleveland City Brewery with the old stock Kennett and champagne ales or whatever for family and medicinal purposes. That was just an ad. They weren't located there at all.
Okay. I did not know that.
Yeah, they were.
I misunderstood that.
That brewery was actually down on, I believe, West 10th and St. Clair in the Flats.
Okay.
But also the Market Garden was actually the location of it was just a market, correct? Market and bar?
No, you're talking Great Lakes. It was the Market Avenue Tavern and
Market Tavern,
Market Avenue Exchange and the Feed and Seed store. We kind of walk through the Great Lakes campus because, of course, their production brewery, where they do all of their big beers, was part of the Leonard Schlother Brewing Company. And then the bus kind of picks us up after our little walking tour at the back of the Great Lakes complex. We drive just a little ways up to Bookhouse Brewing, which just opened. And honestly, I've been waiting for those guys to open just to do this tour.
I've been really excited to see that they finally opened. I've been following that. I really love seeing the
Yeah.
wealth of breweries expand here.
Yeah, and they're in the former Bear Brewery, which was open from about the 1870s to about 1902. So we talk about the Bear Brewery there, and then once we're done there, we spend about 25 minutes there. What's really cool is like I kind of give a little narrative about the history of the brewery that had been on those premises previously, and then we bring one of the owners out to kind of talk about, what the vagaries of opening a brand new brewery in an old location is like. Are they taking any inspiration in the beers that they're brewing currently from what would have been brewed historically in these buildings? Talk a little bit about any artifacts or interesting stuff they dug up in doing their build out, stuff like that. So we do Bookhouse, and then we get back in the bus and we go down to Forest City, which of course is an awesomely historic building. It was the home of the Atlantic Beer Garden back in the 1860s. So there I get to talk a little bit about the history of outdoor beer gardens in Cleveland, as well as the fact that there were actually 3 prior breweries in Cleveland history with the Forest City moniker.
Really?
Yeah.
Very cool. I learned something else new today.
Yeah.
I've been learning a ton from listening to you.
And then we take another little walk just down Columbus Avenue to the site of what was once the Oppmann, later Phoenix Brewery. And then we get back in the bus and we do a little sort of driving sightseeing tour along Train Avenue, where a lot of breweries were once upon a time located on what used to be a river, Walworth Run, which has since been culverted and turned into, it was actually the city's first sewer, which is a whole other story. But I love to get into all the history, so we get to see the ruins of what had been the Schneider, later Union Brewery. We get to see the remaining buildings of the Standard Brewing Company, famous for Aaron Brew, and the last standing building from the Pilsner Brewing Company, famous for POC, at the corner of 65th and Clark. And that's kind of our turnaround. And then our last stop is actually getting a tour inside Platform's production facility, which is housed in one of the last remaining buildings of the Lysy Brewing Company, which was like the biggest brewery in Cleveland prior to Prohibition.
I knew that their building had some history to it. I didn't know that was the history to it. That's really cool. There's still a lot of breweries I haven't been to here in Cleveland. There's so many. I still haven't been to Platform, as crazy as that sounds. I've been meaning to go. My dad and I both love the brewery. This is really cool. When I saw Mike from Market Garden gave my dad and I a tour for his birthday, he was telling me about their production facility. It used to be like apartments, and so some of the walls.
Yeah, it used to be a bunch of old houses.
Used to be there's they still have the brick walls from the 20s or whatever it was. That really gripped me when I first went through there, and hearing that stuff. That's the kind of stuff I really think. That's what I really loved about your brewery tour, the bus tour, is the history aspect of it, because that's what really grabbed me and helped me want to focus and, like you, know as much as I can about this industry. I literally started going out and buying as many books as I could about everything. What have I missed about the brewery, the Cleveland, the Brew Bus tour, that I might have missed?
Well, I think we got a little sidetracked when I was kind of given the basics. So, as I mentioned,
sorry about that.
No,
It
it's
tends
okay.
to happen.
You're
It's very
enthusiastic.
conversational.
It's great. So yes, like I said, it's always 3 breweries per tour, for approximately 5-ounce samples per location, guided like a visit to the brew house at least one location, timed to eat a meal at least one location. We're currently working with about 25 breweries around Cuyahoga County. There's only a handful that we either mostly just haven't established relationships with yet. But we have about 7 different routes. And within a lot of those routes, there's some variability. So you can go online, clevelandbrewbus.com. You can see the different routes. You can click on like a view tour calendar button and see what we have laid out for like the next 2-3 months, see how many seats we have available. So you can either go based on, just what date you have available in your schedule, or if you have a specific route that you're really interested in, you can see when we're running that. And because within a lot of those routes there is variability, you actually, when you make your booking online, can vote for which breweries out of the 10 or 12 or 14 that are available as part of that route that you are most interested in visiting, and then I kind of do a little democratic process. I kind of look at everybody booked, and I see how the votes add up, and if there's clear favorites and they're available, we try to go to those. So we have a 20-passenger bus, so let's say we have 3 groups, and they're all about even numbers of people, and they each have 3 totally different breweries that they're interested in, then I'll pick one out of each group's favorites, so everybody gets at least one of their choices. And we group things either geographically or thematically. Okay. So the route we run the most often is what we call our heart of the city route, because we find that most people, they're not as interested in wandering around the suburbs. They're coming in primarily from the suburbs, so they want to check out the things in central Cleveland. So that route encompasses anything from like as far west as Terrestrial to as far east as Goldhorn. Basically, basically West 74th to East 55th and anything in between. So Ohio City, downtown Flats, all eligible as part of that route. We have like in Ohio City and points west, so that kind of goes from 25th as far as like Lakewood or here. We have a downtown and points east that goes as far from like the Flats as far out as like Bottle House, Boss Dog, Cleveland Heights. And then like our Saturday mornings are kind of cool because we do what we call our beer factories routes on Saturday mornings. So every one of those, at least the first, third, fourth Saturday mornings of the month, those trips are always going to include a production brewery tour.
Oh, nice.
So you're getting to see the whole big walking through the works kind of tour. So first Saturday of the month, that's always, that's what we call our ambitious breweries route. That's places that are growing very aggressively. So we do the Market Garden production tour on that. We go to Fatheads and we wrap it up at Platform. Third Saturdays we do what we call Cleveland Classic. So we do the Great Lakes tour on that one. Then Fatheads and Brew Kettle, all places that are kind of established, kind of help to put Cleveland on the brewing map. And then one of my new favorites is the one we're doing on the fourth Saturdays, which is the route that we call Yes We Can, which focuses on places that put their product out in cans. So that one does the Platform production tour, which they don't really have an official tour program yet, but we have a really great relationship with those guys, and they'll send somebody out to the production brewery to kind of walk us through, and we do Saucy and Masthead as the other 2 stops on that.
Very nice.
And then I reserve the second Saturday morning of the month for our small breweries, big flavor route to kind of make up for hitting the big beer factories on the other on the other 3 Saturdays. So we have lots of different choices. Sundays kind of rotates around different routes as well. Plus we do the in the warm weather months we do the history tours on the first and third Sundays of the month.
The haunted history tour coming up.
Well, yeah, we haven't started that yet, but we're planning on doing. I've done a little thing with Lakeview Cemetery a couple times in the summer in the past where they do all kinds of different tours based on kind of the famous people who are buried in there. And so they do like a beer barons thing where they have like Lolly the Trolley, and I stand up at the front of Lolly the Trolley and talk about all the dead brewers who are buried there. We go around to their different grave sites. It's pretty cool.
Interesting.
But there are just as many dead brewers in Riverside Cemetery and in Monroe Cemetery on the near west side. So I'm going to independently do our own thing at those 2 west side cemeteries. We're going to actually try to launch that the last Sunday of this month.
Very cool. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to be here and talk with me and really just give me the ins and outs of this. This has been really, really fun talk. Anything else you want to get out before I go?
I can't really think of anything.
I just want to make sure we cover our bases.
Drink local beer.
Drink local beer.
Yeah, that's always important. And if you are booking one of our tours, keep in mind this is all about learning about local beer and lots of different beer styles. And this is not a party bus. That's it's not the biggest struggle for us anymore, but once upon a time it was. So I always like to let people know that, like, yeah, we're gonna feed you plenty of beer, and if you wanna get some extra stuff on your own, like, that's cool. But if you're in it just to get wasted, like, you can get an Uber for that.
Absolutely. Well, Leslie, Brian, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your night, and thank you all for listening. Have a great night.